Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's live broadcast, where we're going to be looking at Helmsdale as it was during the herring boom. This is a fascinating topic, and we're really pleased to have Jackie Aitken here, who works with the Time Span Museum, which is where the and we're also going to be talking to Lucy Hardy, student at the University of St Andrews, who worked on a digital reconstruction with Sarah Kennedy. Sarah did the reconstruction and Lucy added characters and animations to it. So our discussion of the herring boom in Helmsdale is going to be against the backdrop of this reconstruction of the town as it was then. But the star of the show today is historian Anne Coombs, is a former scheduled ancient monuments field officer for Historic Environment Scotland, and her work covered the whole of the Highlands, which is a huge area. Anne is also a former chair and committee member of the North of Scotland Archaeological Society, and the North of Scotland Archaeological Society does a huge amount of work and has been doing so for decades. So that's great. And Anne has also extensively researched the herring gutters of northeast Scotland from 1840 to 1950. And we're going to hear more about that. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Jackie Aitken, and Jackie and Anne are going to fill us in on the history and background of Helmsdale and the herring gutters.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, it's great to be here again and to show the reconstruction model. So I'm here with Anne. I'm delighted to be here with Anne. She's going to share a lot of your knowledge and insights into this fascinating industry, the fish trade of north of Scotland. But Ian, I think what we'll do is we'll just start by showing slide number 1, which is a map of, it really shows the Moray Firth area here. And I was just going to maybe sort of ask just to kind of summarize for us, you know, just what we're kind of talking about today. So and kind of how, so we've got kind of the herring fish trade in the northeast Scotland, but to put a little bit of background to that, it kind of started more in the 18th century, didn't it, in terms of so where was this fishing taking place, and also, you know, who had the monopoly on this fish trade, and how did it come over to the east coast? Just little bits to put it into context before we begin, Anne.
Right, Jackie. Thank you very much for having me, by the way. But yeah, the herring fishing began really on the west coast, where the shoals of herring would come in right through the 18th century, and they'd come into, you can see from the map how indented the coastline is, and you would get reports of herring shoals coming and literally beaching themselves, and the locals would come and collect this amazing bounty of food for a very short time. And the government saw this resource as very untapped. And so they developed a scheme whereby they would build herring ports all around the north of Scotland. The British Fisheries Society was founded with that aim in mind, and they planned to have 40 ports between roughly Skye right round to Dornoch, where I am. So you can see the whole of that coast was supposed to be populated with all these herring ports. In fact, what happened was Ullapool on the west coast, Tobermory and Loch Bay in Skye were the only ones built on the west. But by far the most successful port was Wick, or Pulteney Town, on the east coast. Helmsdale was built by the Sutherland estates, and of course one of the commissioners of the British Fisheries Society was the son of the Duke of Sutherland, so you've got a big contact there. But right down that east coast, you've got lots and lots of little, almost independent herring ports.
And isn't it true that, it was really the Dutch that had the monopoly to begin with, and then this new government structure kind of made it possible because there were more incentives on the number of barrels being cured. So there were better incentives for investment by maybe curing businesses. The government put money into this as well. And if local landowners had money after Culloden and it wasn't taken away as part of the fortified estates, then but there was also money being pumped into the Highlands as well.
Oh yes, very definitely. It was very much encouraged by the government. I mean, the government were the lords of the country. You know, they ran the shop, and they made sure that they got a reasonable income from it. But also they created bounties which enabled boats to be developed, to be built, and also they put reduced the tax on salt, which allowed them to cure the herring, which of course they got the curing method for making the white herring from the Dutch. By the time we're looking at the later 1700s, then the Dutch had disappeared from this market. Britain had, I think, defeated them thoroughly, and they were not doing the extensive fishing that they had done in the early 1700s.
And I think from there on, Ian, we'll quickly move on to slide 2, which shows it's a plan of the village of Helmsdale, just before we move on to our live reconstruction. So this shows, so Helmsdale was a planned village, as Anne has said, and it was part of the empire building landowners. It was part of their improvements at the time of the Highland clearances. So Helmsdale really was, it was a custom-made fish processing centre, and the landowners invested in this, but also it was there to, allegedly to give employment to the displaced farming tenants from the Strath of Kildonan, and Kildonan itself was given over to higher profit yielding huge flocks of sheep. And the populace came down to the coast, and so this all kind of all merged at the same time, all these events kind of making this extraordinary trade develop. Ian, I think what we'll do now is we're going to take a flight. So we're going to go to the live reconstruction model, and it'd be nice, yeah, if we just slowly zoom in, and we're going to take a journey just into the mouth of the river, very, very slowly. We'll pass the castle of Helmsdale. We've done another event on Helmsdale, which is already recorded, and you can listen to it again if you look at the Open Virtual Worlds event site. And we're going to go up to the Telford Bridge, just to get an overview. You've seen the map, so it'd be quite nice to get an overview of the model itself, and showing that very planned grid pattern of the streets, which is very much part of the Sutherland Estate ground plan. And so in terms of this type of industry, Anne, this setup at Helmsdale is quite different, because at Helmsdale we have landowners investing money into this, but we have another couple of examples of how these fishing villages developed around the, or not just at the time of the Highland clearance, but took advantage of the herring trade. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how is it different to Helmsdale if we go to example Embo, and if we go to example Wick? How are they slightly different in their setup?
Okay, well, Helmsdale and Wick are similar in some ways. Helmsdale was an estate planned village. Wick, i.e. Pulteney town itself, not Wick itself. Wick was a very ancient town, but Pulteney Town was a planned village. Embo, which is tiny still, was, again, it was an estate idea, but Embo village was belonged to the Gordons of Embo, not Sutherland Estates, and the landowner built this village for the white fishing, not for the herring fishing. But in time, as the herring fishing developed and became where the money was, where the boom times were, then the Embo fishermen went to the herring during the season. But when they were not at the herring fishing, they were doing white fishing. They were fishing for cod and haddock off coast of Embo.
So it was already established there, unlike Helmsdale. Yes. It was kind of, they took advantage of a trade that they've already been a part of.
Exactly. But Pulteney Town and Helmsdale were very much focusing on the herring fishing, although both of them also did white fishing, but to a much lesser extent compared to the herring. But Embo never bought herring on shore at Embo, as far as I can understand.
I think we'll just come now, Ian, if we can move down into the harbour area. So we're looking over Helmsdale at the moment, and we want to fly up a bit high up, Ian, and we want to fly over. Yeah, that's a lovely view. So you can see the boats, the boats, the Fifey fishing boats at the harbour mouth. And we just want to come forward now, Ian, and we're just going to concentrate around that rectangular basin of the harbour. And if you could just hover around there, have a look around the harbour and also around the boat, and myself and Anne will just have another little discussion. Thank you very much, Ian. So we know that in 1818, the contractor George Alexander, he built a quay on the north side of the River Helmsdale, creating this rectangular basin costing £1,600. And also it was forming that protective wall for the ships. We also know that this harbour in itself became too small for the many, many boats that would have been cramped in here at the time of during the herring season. And in terms of the boats themselves, Anne, we seem to have, in fact, I'll just stop you there, Ian, and if we could just quickly have a look at slide 3 and 4 very quickly, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the development of the boats. So that's the next one. So this is a George Washington Wilson photograph of all those fishing boats from all different ports crammed into the harbour at Helmsdale. This is dated around 1890. And if we can go to the next slide, Ian. So this is a local photographer, William MacLeod from Helmsdale, and this is actually a photograph that our model is based on. So this is very helpful. And again, this is around 1890, we think. And the boats that are shown in these photographs, we were thinking it's the development of the boats and the potential for fishermen to really get in, to really make an impact in this industry, and of course their relationship with the curers as well, in terms of being able to have decent boats to get decent catches. What types of boat were people using, Anne, to be involved in this industry?
Right at the very beginning, they were just using any old boats, or generally boats that they were rowing, so very hard work. But by the time we're getting to the 1840s, 1850s, and through to the 1880s and 90s, you're looking at really specialised boats. So you've got scaffies and fifeys. But
and on that note, sorry, if you can go back to the live model, Ian, so that while I'm speaking, you can, we'll just have a look around the boats. If we turn to the harbour mouth, and if you just maybe take a fly around some of the boats, that would be lovely. Yes, sorry, Anne.
No. The final type of boats that were used consistently in Embo and Helmsdale, not so much later on as time became much more efficient. But the Zulus were the ones, and they were called Zulus after the Zulu warriors in the South African War, because they were very fast and went through the sea very, very quickly. And that meant that the fishermen could get out into the shoals of herring. And it's worth saying a little bit about the herring themselves at this point, because the herring came in massive shoals. And I started by saying, the fishing began on the west coast, but the changes possibly in the temperatures of the sea meant that the herring shoals moved their main areas round to the north coast and the east coast. They didn't expect the east coast to be the big herring area, but from sort of 1840, 1850, the east coast was the place. And if you had a boat, you wanted to get out there and into the fish as quickly as you could, because you got the first chance to catch the fish and get a really good catch. And that, of course, you then took back to the shore.
I think
Carry on.
And I think from there, sorry, fantastic, Anne. And Ian, what we'll do now, just very quickly before we finish our first chat, is we're going to maybe go on to Shore Street, because we've been talking about the development of the curing yards at Helmsdale. So as we walk along Shore Street, we're going to see these buildings, and these houses are actually the front offices and accommodation for the big curing yards that lie behind them. We'll be visiting one of those curing yards in a second. So this is the kind of business setup now. So we're coming along the buildings. These are the fronts of the curing yards. Just look like quite big houses, but they've got big yards behind them. And as we come up to where the herring gutters are going to be, and just very briefly, if you could just say a little bit about the project you were doing at Embo with the Zulus, because there was a project whereby you were recording the hulks of boats, or boats that had been, you'd found bits of them in the water. And what was the story around that? Why did you think they were there, and what actually transpired?
Right. Initially, we were just doing a survey along the shore, as you say, and we found these remnants of boats lying below Skelbo Castle on the shore there. And the story, as I understood it at that point, was that the fishing boats were pulled up at the end of the at the beginning of the First World War, and the fishermen never came back from the war, and the boats were then burned. But after surveying the boats, and there were 18 of them, we realized that in fact this wasn't the case, that these boats had become redundant rather than specifically pulled up. Skelbo was the place which was the winter port, and there wasn't any room around at Embo Pier to have them by the time they were pulled up out of the water. And I suspect the idea of the burning of them was in fact because we did find sawn pieces of wood that had been cut, that were part of the boats. Probably the boats were taken back to Embo as fuel, rather than being this great conflagration of saddened, people sad that their husbands hadn't come back from the war. I think it was slightly less dramatic and sad, rather more a case of the
Yes.
boats that they were using in Embo became redundant because they didn't have proper engines and they weren't big enough.
Wow.
And the fishermen from Embo then went back onto the boats and sailed from the likes of Helmsdale and Wick,
Yes.
and were part of the industry as it grew after the First World War.
It's absolutely fascinating, that project. So here we are, Anne. We're up now just a little bit, and then we're going to talk to another lovely lady who's joined us as well. But we are just a little bit, because at Helmsdale we've got two different ways that the herring or the places where herring were cured. And you can talk about what that curing is in a minute. But just very briefly, and just we haven't got too much time, but Ian, if you can just very briefly show us number 6. We'll skip number 5, but we'll go into number 6. That's slide number 6, because I just want to make for the people listening the difference between. There were at Helmsdale, they were gutting the herring mostly inside these yards, but that wasn't always the case.
No, they likes of as I said, Wick and Helmsdale were very planned and organised, but lots and lots of other places all the way down that east coast, people would just, as you can see out of this wonderful picture, they bring the boats in, pull them up on the beach. You've got the big square patterns of the nets being laid out to dry. And in the foreground beside the river there's a small square box, if you like, a farlin, where the women were gutting the herring. And you can see the barrels there. So what you're seeing is the full process, the boats out fishing, pulling the boats in, gutting the fish, and packing them in the barrels and drying the nets, all ready for the next time out. This one is Berrydale, but the same process would be going at Dunbeath, at Staxigo, at Sarclett, Leipster, all the way down until you get to Helmsdale. Port Gower probably had something similar to this, but
hopefully Brora as well.
I think Brora did, but after Brora, you don't, and Embo, as I say, you probably didn't do it quite in this way because they weren't fishing for the herring. They would go away to fish for the herring. It's a little bit too far south for it, but you get it then at Ballantor and down to Inverness and all along the east coast.
It's fascinating just to see that, yeah, where they were doing the work. So Ian, we'll go back to the model. And we are maybe hand back to our Alan and Lucy, but maybe we could just have a little conversation, Alan, with Lucy, or would you like to have a conversation with Lucy or me? Me, okay. So, so what we did in the model, this was amazing because we were making the model and we were saying, well, you know, the main thing about the model is the girls gutting the fish. And we didn't have any characters or digital characters in the model, and we didn't really know where to start. So it was at that stage went back to Alan. And Alan, maybe you could tell us how you went about, you know, developing these digital characters, and who did you get involved?
Oh, we made this reconstruction of the curing yard, and I mean, I don't think you mentioned that one of the curing yards was actually on the same site as Timespan is, as the Timespan.
We're not there yet.
Oh, is that coming? Sorry to jump ahead.
That's our finale.
Sorry to jump ahead.
You can jump ahead. It's
this
fine.
project called Cine, which is a great multinational, international project in the northern peripheries. And actually, I think that we'd done a little bit of stuff around the curing yard previously and had a bit of a reconstruction. And I seem to remember Adiola. Do you remember Adiola?
Yeah, yes.
I didn't think he did some work with Joe and yourself.
Yes, that's correct.
On it previously. But yeah, the Cine project gave us the opportunity to really turn this into a big reconstruction of the whole of Helmsdale and all of that. So that was great. But you and I think it was Sadie as well kept saying rather persistently, you know, it would be great to have some characters.
Well, actually, Alan, it came from our community groups that were working on the digital reconstruction.
That's
and
very
they said, well, what's a curing yard without the herring gutting girls? My grandmother was a herring gutter, and you're not even showing what they did. So we thought we better act quickly on that.
So they said this to you, and I said it to, and you said it to me, and I passed it on to quite a lot of different people, some of whom had a bit of a go, and some of whom didn't fancy that. But Lucy was somebody. Lucy, you kind of like took the bait on it, didn't you? You liked the idea of creating some characters in the reconstruction and of working with time span. I think as part of a project you were doing for masters, or was it after the project?
It's on my dissertation project.
Yeah.
So I saw a proposal for it, and I immediately I immediately liked the idea, sound of it, so I decided to go for that. It's something I was quite interested in working with. So I've never really heard about the gutting girls. So yeah, I immediately thought it'd be a good project for my dissertation, which is why I approached you about it.
Yes, and I think you've done a great job in terms of getting the characters in there. We were chatting earlier on, and Jackie, I think you were particularly excited by the motion.
Yes, because I mean, you know, Lucy, I think you wanted some background information, so we sent you some of the film footage that you can get online of the herring gutting girls up at Wick, and you wanted to see what was the action of gutting a herring and throwing it behind you into, you know, and into a kind of wooden tub, which you know, it's not, you know. So we were wondering, is it possible? Can anybody actually make that happen? So you obviously had a look at that film footage and kind of, you know, put it into some kind of movement with the animated character.
Yeah. So the video was a great help, basically, because I could watch what they did with their motions, and I could go into the software that I used to develop it and basically map it out myself. So you basically have to rig the characters, so like you can move their arms in like specific ways. Oh. And then I just basically followed what the video showed of them like picking up the fish in one swift motion, just gutting them and then chucking it into the barrels behind them. So I tried to map that out exactly as I saw it in the video.
Can I ask you, how long did that take you to do? So to do that kind of, you know, I mean, you know, we look at it and we take it for granted that you know, that's what they do, but you had to do that from scratch. So that's a lot of, is it kind of computer programming with your software?
It's very manual, I guess, because you have to position it yourself. Like there's not like a mocap suit or something. It's, you have to like move each point to where you want it in the animation. So it took me, well, I was continuing doing it throughout my dissertation process, which was about 3 or 4 months, I think it was. So throughout that process, I was doing all the different animations. So it does take quite a while to do.
Well, do you know this? I really have to thank you, and for on behalf of everybody in the Helmsdale community as well, who absolutely love the herring gutting girls, who represent so many important figures in people's lives in these fishing villages, which Anne will come to talk about in a minute.
Maybe we could have a quick look at the animation that we've been talking about. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. Can we go a little bit closer, Ian? Just maybe if we could go a little bit closer and maybe just take a little circle around the figures, just quite close up. And we'll visit Lucy's wonderful herring gutting girls again when we go into the final curing yard. But that's quite nice to kind of. So
there's some doing it outside and there's some doing it.
There are.
Some doing it inside.
So Anne, from an expert who researches this, do you think Lucy's done a great job?
I think it's brilliant. It's such a difficult thing, I imagine, to do this. If you like, the only comment I have to make is the girls themselves, when they were gutting, were a lot faster.
Really, because
60 herring a minute.
Wow.
60 herring a minute.
Yeah,
that's hard. I find that hard to believe. That yes. you could do that. You could. I mean, that is incredibly fast, isn't it?
It is.
It is.
I think that's the very best ones.
Yeah, but it's improved, and it gives us some idea of the numbers of herring that would have been coming in as well. You know.
Well, actually, on that note, Alan, just very briefly before we move to time span as it the museum, which was a curing yard. Just a little figure for you. So in 1814, on the open shore, there were 2,000 barrels cured. And at that stage, from the statistics we've got here, there were 60 women involved at that time. And then by 1819, there were 20,000 barrels of herring cured. And the number of women, it's hard to believe, it says it was over 600 women. And I just, because everything was it was a labor force, wasn't it? So everything was done by people. And then we've also got here, by 1867, this is probably at the height, we've got over 45,000 barrels being of cured herring being packed. So quite significant numbers within the overall Scottish trade. What I think we might do is we're going to have time to chat. Thank you very much, Lucy. And if we could just move down Shore Street, Ian, and as Alan said, we're going to move into a curing yard and have a look at what's actually happening inside one of the curing yards. So here we're passing, and we've got some barrels here. And what I love about the barrels when we come into the curing yard, I don't know if the keen-eyed people will have noticed that they've got on them Helmsdale full mats, and it's the branded stamp that you have on some of your herring if it passes the quality standard. And we've got the nets on the open quay there. So this end building beside the famous double-arched Telford Bridge is our wonderful time span museum, which was a curing yard, and we've reconstructed what it would look like inside. So we're just going to go in there now. In terms of the curing yards, Anne, just before we come to the herring girls themselves, so here we seem to have a building at the front. Actually, this is a single story, but I think most of them were two-story. And then we have a building at the back, and then we have these open sort of sided sort of working areas with these stores at each side. Is this the usual kind of setup for inside a curing yard?
Not really, not in my experience. You know, I'm thinking of Wick and Pulteney, not Pulteney Town, but Ullapool, and they did it mostly on the quays.
Yeah.
But having said that, it's quite possible that there were others buildings in Wick, especially, where they were doing it like this.
And so this is what we find quite unusual. I think, Ian, just to show how we got to this stage, could we see very quickly the next photograph, please? And I think it's the one after that. Oh, right, we'll go back then. So I think I added one, but I don't think we, anyway. So so this actually shows us, it's a little bit further along Shore Street, and this was a curing yard, a big, massive curing yard, and it also had a red herring house, which I'll ask Anne about. But behind it, so this is actually the Harbour Master's building now, this sort of, I don't know, 3 or 4 story tall stone building. But behind is the yard, and the cobbling on the working area is still preserved where those herring gutting tables would have been. So that piece of archaeology, that very, that's still preserved at Helmsdale. But Anne, I just want to ask you, what is a red herring house?
Red herring they were soaked in brine after they'd been caught. They were soaked in brine for several days in this house. In the bottom story of this building, there would have been vats of salty water that the herring would be soaked in, and then there would be at one end there would be a part of the building which would set up to smoke them. So you ended up with a red-coloured fish. What I worked on were the white herring. So they were just salted in the barrels. And so it was a much quicker process. But they were two slightly different ones, and I think the term red herring has become a phrase that we use for something that isn't relevant. It's something that leads us away from the main subject.
And isn't the term on tenterhooks? Is that where the fish were hung up on hooks
for the smoking? Yes, yes, yeah. You can use it in that term. Yeah.
So Ian, we're going to go back to Timespan Curing Yard now, the live model where the girls are gutting and there's lots of activity. But one thing I would just like to ask you, Anne, to begin with. So why was the herring important? Who was buying it in the early days? And, you know, what was it about the food that made it a sellable product? Because we know that there's kind of less... there's part of this history that's very much linked to the slave trade as well.
Yes, the herring is an oily fish and deteriorates very quickly. So you have to process it very soon after it is caught. Otherwise, it's unusable. Great to use it if you can cook it there and then and eat it. But of course, coming in the huge quantities, it has to be preserved. It's either created as red herring or white herring, and then you can pack it into barrels, and once it's in barrels, so long as you've got transport, you can take it anywhere in the world. And of course, if you've got a great workforce that needs something that can be kept for a long time, food that can be kept for a long time, herring is ideal for that. And it got transported to the West Indies for feeding the slaves, which I always think was just not just adding insult to injury, rather more than that, have to eat salt herring in the temperatures they were working in. It was just, there are no words. With emancipation, strangely enough, the bottom fell out of that market.
Yes.
As the slaves then, free slaves, were able to choose what they ate, and they chose not to eat salt herring. It did continue, but to a much lesser extent after the 1830s. But the market then became the Baltic states, Germany especially, and Russia, and all the Baltic states, where they have a taste for herring anyway. You know, it's an acceptable food. It's something they enjoyed, apart from Britain as well. You know, we ate it ourselves.
Ian, if we could actually be mobile around the curing yard, just going to the various areas, just keep on the move, just around, just so everybody gets a good view of what's happening. But just on the slave trade, well, we know that shipments of herring from Wick and from Helmsdale was being plied through the Caledonian Canal, and it was being taken to Ireland. And we believed there it was going to ports, some of it going to the west coast and some of it going to Belfast, and it was being repacked on much bigger transatlantic ships for the transatlantic voyage to the West Indies. And we're doing research on that to tie down the very instances of that event and what the real impact was. So that's some of the research that Timespan's doing at the moment. And just very interesting, in 1819, we have an import list of what was coming into Helmsdale Harbour. We've got herring going to the West Indies, but what have we got coming into Helmsdale from the West Indies? Well, we've got rum, we've got sugar, we've got molasses, we've got tobacco, all these commodities finding its way into the Scottish ports as well. So, Anne, in terms of the herring gutters themselves, we've got to talk about, maybe we could, Ian, just go back to the table and talk about the herring gutters. What is the difference between because I get the term herring gutter and fishwife. Are they the same thing?
Yes and no. Generally speaking, you will get some gutters who are fishwives, but you will also get gutters who never ever were fishwives. A fishwife, if we could go to number 7, the one of the fishwife, the two ladies talking to each other.
Just the next slide, Ian.
Brilliant, yeah. This is a really late photograph of a fishwife, creel on her back, and she would be from Embo without a doubt. I don't know her name, but this photograph came from History Links in Dornoch. 1950s by the dress, possibly 1940s. This lady on the left would walk. She would work with her husband, who would be fishing out in the Dornoch, in front of Dornoch and Embo, and fishing for whitefish. He would come home, she would prepare it, she may smoke some of it, she may gut it. She would then put it in the creel on her back and walk inland to all the farms and sell her fish. She would, as you see, she's dressed, she's got kind of overall on over her decent clothes. And if you can see at her side, there's a little pocket, and that would be full of the cash. Now, if you are walking anywhere, anytime with cash, that obviously beside you, then you are potentially likely to meet with a level of violence. So a lot of these women were very feisty, you know, a tongue on her like a fishwife. Well, she had to be. Quite often they would take their children with them. This creel on her back would be full of wet fish, not necessarily cured fish, but wet fish, you know, fillets of haddock, cod, etc. And she may well come back with butter and milk from the farms. Instead of selling, she would barter it. A gutter, on the other hand, and if
maybe
you
we could go
to
back to
one,
the next picture, Ian.
These are the gutters, similar sort of time actually, probably in Yarmouth. These girls would, some of them work as fishwives in the wintertime, but during the herring season, they would go away to the herring and act as gutters in order to supplement their money. And also the husbands were away with the boats at the herring fishing. But there would also be girls who had come off crofts, who had never married a seaman or a fisherman, and they would go probably from the age of 16, 17 and go as a group. Quite often, you know, sisters or friends would become, and they worked in groups of 3. So you had 2 gutters and a packer.
Maybe, Ian, we could go back to the model to see the gutters, Ian, and then maybe move round to the packer who's at the side while Anne explains it. Yeah.
So you 2 would be gutting, and they would, as you said about the barrels, it says Helmsdale, matty full. That's a quality of herring. The girls gutting would gut as quick as they could. And as they threw it back, they would decide what quality it was. There were 5 different qualities, and they would know, even working as fast as they did. And then the packer would lay the fish in layers, salt, herring, salt, herring, salt, herring. Especially the Russian buyers, when they came to buy the catch, they would take the lid off the barrel and look at how it was packed. So the packer had really quite an important job. And then the 3 of them would be paid according to the number of barrels they filled. So, you know, as a group, they had to work together, and
they had to work together and that was how they earned their money. Yeah. You know, a good team got decent return, very important. And I suppose seasoned herring teams would want to work together and maybe train up the young ones as well.
Yes.
Ian, if we can go to so we pass the packer and we just go up to one of the other important, the cooper. So the cooper is right at the top, and you can see he's hammering away. So it was also commonplace that you had blacksmiths and coopers working with the curers in the curing yard.
Yes, the barrels were very often made on site. So you can see here, your man is making the barrels for the girls to fill up. They would come in bits, you know, flat pack. and be made on site. You would have the curer, who was the boss man. He would go round and hire the girls at the beginning of, well, sort of early part before the season started. And he would have his group of coopers who would do kind of all sorts of heavy work. They would make the barrels, they would put the lids on them, but they would also move them about the yard with the gutters as well. So you have a really good team, and I think there's a picture after the gutters and the fishwives. You've got one, I think, somewhere. There may be a picture
maybe
of
it's
them
not there.
with the
Sorry,
gutter.
I'm not sure it's there.
Maybe it doesn't matter. But they were part of the, and quite often in some of the records you will get marriages of people who are coopers marrying gutters, as well as fishermen marrying gutters. So you get a real sense of community. It was if you did not enjoy going gutting, if you were a girl who went off for a season at the herring and you didn't enjoy it, you never went back. It was a hard life. As soon as the herring came in, as soon as the boats were unloaded, you had to be on the quay, and you would stay until every fish was gutted.
It's illuminated to me by my conversations with you, Anne, about the independent nature and the control that the herring girls had actually over their own their own trade, what they did. They could stand up for their rights, but it just seems it's a shame that history doesn't really represent this in the official records, so to speak, in terms of census records, and even some of the inventories on the numbers of boats or the numbers of fishermen at different ports. They don't really represent the number of women present at the ports at the same time in the same manner as they would in terms of its importance, so to speak. Maybe we could open it up now, Alan and Lucy, just have a little chat, and Anne, just about anything that we have chatted about today. Wow, we've covered an awful lot, and we've had a real good tour of the actual the model itself. Ian, maybe what we could do is we could just maybe come up and just keep mobile over the model just for a little while, just to give everybody looking a view of some. So what another interesting thing, the back buildings of these curing yards, when we did some research in, so we could just have a look, perfect view as we look down at the yards inside these buildings, going right across at that level and maybe coming down Shore Street, Ian, so we can go over the tops of the curing yards. We think that these back, the buildings that are right at the back of the curing, we think that these were probably the temporary accommodation for the herring gutting girls, because isn't it true, and they would need somewhere to stay?
Oh yes, because they came from all over. They weren't people who just lived in Helmsdale. They would travel from Shetland all the way down to Yarmouth over the summertime. They started in May in Shetland, and they worked their way down to Lowestoft and Yarmouth in November. So you would have to have accommodation provided. In Shetland, it was wooden huts. In Helmsdale and Wick, you've got these stone-built buildings, which must have been a lot warmer, a lot nicer. And then when you got to Yarmouth, you went into the bed and breakfast houses that had been used as holiday houses in the summertime. So you've got a real change of accommodation. I think you're right about the houses in Helmsdale, and they must have been a great relief to many of the girls, because they would get all sorts of different, and some of it very inferior, accommodation. So to get a nice stone house would be brilliant.
Well, one of the other things that we found quite interesting was that they built a free church in Helmsdale that accommodated, it's got a seating pew space for about 12 or 1300 people. Now, the population of Helmsdale, not during, out with the herring season, would have been about 500-600 people. So it just shows you church was very important to the fishing communities, and also they obviously built a big enough church to accommodate those that would come for the herring season, the fishermen and the herring gutting girls who would have attended church on Sunday, but from all over the ports that managed to come to Helmsdale to work. I mean,
religion was hugely important to them, especially in the latter years. You know, the revivals and Sankey and Moody and all these evangelical revivals were very popular. There were reports of girls, you know, going down the street in Yarmouth and in all the other ports singing hymns. It was just so important to them, and it was, in a way, one way of controlling all the different churches had missions that they would send nurses and people to all the different ports to minister to the women, especially because, you know, if you're working with salt herring, salt and herring, you know, wet fish, you would get very sore hands. And so that was quite often the nurses were very important. And of course, they were attached to the different churches. So absolutely, they would be encouraged very strongly to go to church, and they would go anyway because that was part of their culture when they were at home.
It is absolutely fascinating. Gosh, what insights. Alan, in terms of making the model, what's the model actually made in for the technical people out there? How is it made? What's it actually made in? What's the packages and things?
Well, the model is made using Unreal 4, or at least it is assembled in Unreal 4, which is a game engine. But I mean, Lucy, you maybe talk a little bit about the technologies that you use with the characters.
Yeah, so to create all the animations and modeling changes or texture changes, they were all done in Blender and then just imported straight into Unreal. So I only reuse Blender for the animation. So
that's really cool because Blender is, well, you can just look it up on the web, actually. You just Google Blender, but it's completely free. So you could just download it and install it on a computer and go away. You'd need some level of specification, wouldn't you? I think it would need to be a fairly modern computer with a graphics card or something.
Yeah, it takes a lot of processing power to be able to do modeling and animation and stuff. So you would need quite a high-tech computer to be able to do it. But yeah, my laptop's able to do it, so I don't think it's that bad. As long as you're not running anything else in the background, it should be all right.
So any computer bought in the last 2 or 3 years with its own graphics card, you should be up. But also Blender is quite nice for making videos as well. You can make videos with it and things like that. But I think that, I mean, while you were talking, Jackie and Dan, the reconstruction is nice and it's lovely. It's great to have the characters in it. But I was thinking we really should do some sort of herring map application, you know, because there's so much going on there, you know, in terms of the herring moving down the coast, the people following them down the coast, all the different areas that takes place, the East Coast and the West Coast, but also then the trade, where the herring went. You know, and it was fascinating when you were saying about, you know, when you had the emancipation in the United States, it knocked the bottom out of the herring industry here, and people had to find new markets or develop existing markets for them. And it just seems that it'd be really good to tell that whole story in the digital domain and to bring in the sort of commentary that you've kind of talked about and the reconstructions. I mean, it would be lovely to match what we've done in Helmsdale with Wick and Ullapool. I was over in Ullapool actually, and the yards there are pretty impressive. You know, on a beautiful island and stuff. Isle St Martin, I think it is.
Oh, Isle Martin, yeah.
Isle Martin, sorry.
And you've actually did a trail, didn't you? So what did the trail encompass?
It was just a fairly basic, just saying, you know, these are places where you can go to see where the herring were gutted, up through the east coast. It was all part of the Dornoch community group, trying to encourage people to stay in Dornoch but travel and visit different places. And so we've got Helmsdale, we've got Timespan, we've got Wick and the Wick Heritage Society there. And I've mentioned, you know, a few of the smaller, you know, places like Sarclett, which is the most extraordinary little port, and you've got Walligo and you know, the Walligo Steps, which people are always slightly hesitant about telling tourists about, because you really don't want 10,000 people going down those steps. It really is, you know, there's a health and safety issue there, but they are the most extraordinary remains of the herring industry. And I know when I was doing my research, I went down to Port Gower, because Port and Gower, you know, it's Lord Gower was the Duke of Sutherland's son, and it was named after him. And it never became a Helmsdale. And yet, you know, it could have done. And the bases are still there. Excuse me. And yeah, there's lots of scope to expand what I did on a piece of paper.
So I think this is where the local heritage, the kind of the you know, the researchers that are out there doing research, and the local communities, the museums, and the digital technology works really well to develop something into a sort of a more interactive trail, as Alan, you've been alluding to. I think I think the time is right to do something like that. I hope we've stimulated that interest today, and people will say, yes, that's a great idea.
I'm definitely stimulated about it, and because we've just got a really nice 360 camera as well, and I can imagine, you know, once it becomes a bit safer, kind of driving, going to all of these places, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I could find a student who would be interested in working on your piece of paper. Anne, would you be, if I could find somebody, would you be interested in sharing that with them?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about herring forever.
Do you enjoy eating them?
Yes.
There's a good
I'm not desperate. I wouldn't have it every day, but yeah, I quite enjoy herring.
I quite like them. They're not my favourite fish. I mean, I would eat a mackerel before a herring, I think.
I think the boniness of them is slightly hard.
There's nothing like a fresh herring and oatmeal.
You talk about this 60,000, or was it 45,000 barrels on Helmsdale Hull?
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you've kind of alluded to different factors, but so what happened then? So because today I don't think there's a barrel comes out of Helmsdale Harbour, is there? So how do you get from
the demise of the industry?
Yeah, where did it all, I don't know if it went wrong, but why is it not happening now?
I think Anne will tell you the reasons, but certainly linked to crushing market forces and sort of what's happening in the rest of the world. And maybe you could enlighten us, but you mentioned the First World War as well, and the wars and that kind of period. So how did the industry where is it today?
Okay, well, starting from the First World War, of course, having lost the West Indies trade, if you like, then of course we went to war with Germany, and so that trade crashed. And also there certainly were a lot of the fishermen went away to sea into the Navy, and so there was a gap, but it tailed off from there on, and a lot was to do with changing tastes. Just talking about, do you like eating herring? And if you have probably, if you have the choice, you don't choose to do that. And refrigeration and canning, all this sort of thing, freezing, all these things began to develop from the end of the First World War, probably sort of in the 20s, 30s. By the 50s, it really had gone. But the real important bit was the herring. Also, the shoals of herring just failed. They'd been overfished. You know, you can't take 45,000 barrels out, you know, and that Helmsdale is hugely important. But just think, Wick was 4 times the size of Helmsdale. And then you've got the ports like Balta Sound up in Shetland. And then the same again when you get to Yarmouth. You've got massive, massive amounts of fish being taken out. They thought you could not overfish the herring. But I can remember, 20, 30 years ago, there really were no herring. They actually stopped you bringing herring ashore. I do remember seeing a boat loaded with herring in Ullapool Harbour, and they were shoveling the herring off the boat onto back of a pickup truck. And I immediately thought, you know, it was so much part of what I was doing at the time. I thought, those are going up to a croft, and they're going to be salted up at the croft for the winter. But the taste for salt herring had almost completely gone by then. The stocks are beginning to improve again. So, we can begin to fish again for herring to a certain extent, but we nearly killed them off.
Yes, and I think the British Fishery Board, but the laws and regulations that governed these fisheries, certainly when the monopoly kind of came into the local waters for the British fisheries, also very much opened up a free-for-all kind of system where it was really intensive trawling, so different really intensive and intrusive methods of vastly collecting huge amount of fish in one go, that kind of, as you allude to, Anne, really led to quite a devastating effect on that trade as well. But I certainly do agree and completely understand it's the the taste for something as well, because I mean, I like a oatmeal herring, but actually something salted and just preserved, I think it's, you know, it's a slightly different taste. But when it's all you could get, then that's when the trade became it could monopolize any trade, when that's the only food you can get, and you needed that food to be preserved for many months.
There are a couple of questions.
Oh,
so one is about the roofs. So just wondering why there weren't slate roofs and why they were tiled roofs that you're using?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, actually. So we do know from photographic evidence, and actually for Helmsdale and quite a few, but Helmsdale in particular, that the house roofs, most house roofs were slated, but anything to do with manufacture or anything to do with the industry of processing the fish, the curing yards, were red pan tile roofs, and we've got evidence of that. Why is that the case? Probably it might have been cheaper, I don't know. And also, I think we also find this in old steadings where you have pan-tiled roofs as well. And the boats were able to take back. So boats coming into Helmsdale are actually able to import these pan tiles. So the curers that are probably running these yards are able to actually organize the importation of maybe cheap tiles that are being made elsewhere. And I think it's to do with as well that certainly in the salt, when you're making salt, it allows evaporation. You think it's not, it's not an enclosed space. These are open yards, so it's a different type of roofing material. Anne, have you got anything to shed on this? It's
not really, apart from the fact Helmsdale was built by Sutherland Estates, and just down the road you've got the tile works in Brora.
Well, yes, absolutely. I'm producing a lot of tiles at Brora. I can't believe I forgot that one, Anne. Absolutely. But certainly when something is industrial, as in agricultural, or to do with fishing around Sutherland, you do tend to find, certainly where I've been looking, you do tend to find at Brora and Helmsdale red pan tiled roofs. But accommodation houses were usually thatch or slate.
Okay. There's been on the chat. There's been a lot of praise for the conversation and the history. People have found it really informative. So I think there's a lot of people wanting to say thank you to you, Anne, and to Jackie in particular. And also people loving the reconstruction and the images, particularly of the herring gutting process. But there's a couple of people commented because the digital stuff is quite visual, but there's sort of like someone was saying, "Oh, it's a shame you can't do smell-o-vision," and also wondering what the soundscape would have been like. So it would be interested to hear what it would have been like. So I was wondering if you could like do a sort of audio explanation of what the smell-o-vision might have been like at the time.
Very fishy. Yes.
Although I kind of, the thing about smell is that it's a kind of destructive sense, isn't it? In the sense that if there's a smell that is there all of the time, it kind of goes into the background and you don't notice it.
It does. That's absolutely. I think I was just going to say that. Yeah. I think there've been a lot of, I imagine, and certainly from looking at some of the films, you have the herring gutting girls who are working away, probably maybe chatting and giving instructions to each other. You've got the curer or the overseer kind of giving instructions as well. So you've got all that going on. You've got the cooper banging the hoops onto the barrels. You've got the boats coming in. You've got I would imagine they call it the hustle and bustle of the industry.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Anne?
I think so. I think it would have been quite a noisy, but quite a jolly atmosphere as well. You know, sort of back chat and general chit chat, and as you say, the noise of the actual working and rumble of barrels as they roll the barrels about the yard and make the barrels. I think and seagulls.
Of course.
Seagulls would have been there. Yes. Just thought of that. But yeah, you would get a lot of that kind of...
all that herring guts.
Herring gull, yeah. And you would have the clatter. I mean, if you ever go down to a boatyard, you hear the sails, the clatter against the masts. It's quite reminiscent. You know, if you hear it, you know exactly what kind of landscape you're in. But and the girls would be speaking Gaelic. They almost all would be speaking Gaelic at that state, you know, in the sort of 1880s, very definitely. So an interesting one to get your head around if you were going to put sound to it.
But good one to think about.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, I think from that, those are the main questions that came through on the chat. I'm not sure if Lucy, is there anything you want to add?
I think I saw a question about the labour conditions and employment rights of a herring girl, if you've got any thoughts on that.
Labour rights fairly limited, I think. But as I said, you know, if you really did not like it, you didn't do it again. You know, the curers would come round to hire you, and if you'd hated it, you would not go back again, because it was a hard life. So yeah, it's latterly, in the 20th century, they began to have sort of more unionized, and there were a few strikes where they just said, no, we're not getting up. And of course, immediately your whole catch has to be dumped if your women
Well,
won't work for you.
That's quite interesting then. So yeah, so there is sort of class struggle on the dockside going on in the harbour.
And very much a female setup, in as much as sometimes with groups of women who are in those working conditions where you've got a few men overseers, if they really don't like anybody, and because you have fishwives working in the gutting as well, they were older women with strong views and strong ideas, and if they didn't like what was going on, the curers and the coopers would know about it very quickly, and they would have to get it sorted, because you cannot leave herring 24 hours sitting on the quay in the heat. Imagine a day like today. It's beginning to get very smelly by this time of day.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. And so what was the sort of standard of living like then? I mean, but what was the remuneration? Because it seems like, is it a bit like going offshore? It's like hard work, and it takes you away from your family and all of that sort of stuff. But there's some sort of monetary incentive, or that you get a reasonable
definitely.
whack for it.
I mean, you're sort of really going into what was society like in the Highlands at that point of time. They would go away in May, which is the difficult time. If you're living on a croft, by May, June, the tatties are almost finished. You've still got the whole family to feed. They are providing an income, and they would be given a retainer when they were first hired, from which they would buy their clothes, their waterproof clothes for working, but also it would sort of be at home for the use of the family. And then you would get your big pay at the end of the season, when you would get paid per barrel, but you would also get a weekly wage. So income-wise, it was a very important part of if you were coming from a crofting life, and certainly if you were a fisherman and a fisherman's wife, you would that would be very important.
I think this would all have happened after the clearances, pretty much.
From the clearances onwards, it began sort of beginning of 1800. It was happening, but slightly differently before then, in the 1780s, 1750s even. But the real industrial, like you've got at Helmsdale and at Wick, that was 1800s onwards. So and the conditions would be pretty much what the women living in the houses made it. They would take wallpaper with them when they went up to Shetland, because the huts up there had wooden walls, and of course they weren't occupied except when the gutters were there. So each year they would take a little bit of wallpaper and decorate it, and a few pictures from home. They would send postcards home, the postcards weekly, with how many barrels they'd managed to fill. So
it's a fascinating record. Have you kind of like delved through it and looked at the...
I've seen pictures. Many of the pictures I have are from these postcards, but I have never seen a postcard. Frustratingly, I would love to see one. I just know that that's what, it's documented that that's what they did.
Fascinating. So that's,
And I think as well, just maybe rounding it up in terms of the herring gutting girls, I think there were instances, Anne, weren't there, of herring gutting girls, I've looked at some in Lewis, I think, where they went on strike just for better pays and maybe conditions and things like that. So but it's just the historical record. It's just where official records are kept. You know, it doesn't always mention the female gender in that way and their employment. And it doesn't really give you the proper statistics of the significant impact they made on these industries.
And very briefly to finish off, you know, yes, they could strike, and they did on occasions, and there were government inquiries into the conditions quite late on, but there were, especially into the actual living conditions, because they were so poor. So obviously the women were complaining about them, and you know, the interesting thing is the women in the 1950s are older, and they're still going because they enjoyed it. There was a definite choice thing going on there.
It's absolutely a good talk for hours. Absolutely fascinating. We'll have to come back and do another part, I think.
I can see the attraction of spending the summer in Helmsdale.
Of course. Good fish and chips.
It's fantastic fish and chips, and not stingy on the portions either, it has to be said. Okay, so are we kind of like in a position to wrap this up? I think we probably are. So thank you so much, Lucy and Sarah, for helping make the reconstruction.
Absolutely,
and
Sarah.
Adiola Fabola and Joe Clements, who did stuff previously, and Jackie Aitken, who has masterminded the reconstruction and its use. And you're so eloquent in the exposition of the story and all of that. And I think you have a little bit of a fan base developing on the on the Facebook thing. People coming in specifically. So I think your reputation is great. And Anne Coombs, thank you so much for coming along. It was fascinating listening to what you had to say into the history and answering the questions as well. I you know, particularly the smell-o-vision and the labour history and that I find that kind of like fascinating. And also, to be honest, you know, yes, it's hard work for the girls, and that's the first thing that you think, oh my God, how can people do that for so long? But to get an idea that these probably weren't the poorest people in that society, that the work that they did was rewarded. I found that really interesting as well. So
thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I'm hoping this will be the first of many encounters. And Ian for doing the stuff, and Sadie, who has been interacting on the in the social sphere, and whose support for Cine and the project through Timespan has just been fantastic. So there we go. So I think it's only right for Jackie to get the last word, unless anybody else has something. So if anybody got anything else they want to add, that would be great.
Now, just say thanks to everybody. Thank you for doing all the thank yous, Alan, and thanks to you for hosting today's event, and for the Open Virtual Worlds team. And if you want to look at the models, they're on the Open Virtual Worlds, but they're on the Timespan website as part of our Real Rights exhibition. So go to Timespan, right at the top tab, Real Rights, and you can see the 3 models that we made, and hope to see you all again soon. So bye.
Yeah, we're going to do a major Cine launch, so you need to look out for that in the future. Remiss of me not to mention Real Rights. It's a fantastic exhibition. So after this, hop off over to the Timespan website, which is timespan.org.uk.
Okay, that's the one.
Is that right? Yeah, so just go over there and have a look at that, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. Bye.